very little known about PTSD. In fact, back then it was called shell shock
Yeah.
because it was attributed to military coming back from war.
Right.
So I had no idea about mental health and the things that could occur when you are forced into trauma. And um, and so all the things that I was dealing with, which now I can look back and see that it was severe depression and anxiety because my dad was my safe space. He was my security.
Yeah.
Now he's gone. And, so panic attacks, not sleeping. I didn't sleep at all. And my mom was dealing with all of the things that she needed to deal uh, with advocates and people within the department. And I was kind of pushed to the side a bit um, because of the assumption of I had my boyfriend, because I had a boyfriend back then, um, and is now my husband. But I had somebody and I had friends, and so therefore I was going to be fine,
Yeah.
which I was not.
Hello, I'm John Brink, and we are podcasting on the Brink from downtown Prince George, British Columbia, Canada. And for all those people watching us from around the world, they say, "Oh, we know where Canada is, and in British Columbia on the west coast, right? Right." And then there is that big city called Vancouver. Where are you, John, in relationship to Vancouver? Well, we are 500 miles north of Vancouver, or for our European friends, 800 kilometers. And Prince George is in the center of British Columbia, north, south, east, and west. It is a city with lots of forest, lots of lakes, within 50 miles, 100 lakes. And we have lots of other friends here: black bears, grizzly bears, caribou, deer, wolf, foxes, you name it, we got them all. We call it paradise. Now, today we got a very, very interesting guest. Her name is Susan Snow. And Susan is a powerful voice for healing, resilience, and transformation. She's the daughter of a slain LAPD, Los Angeles Police Department detective, Thomas C. Williams. Susan's life was forever changed on Halloween night, October 31st, 1985, when her father was ambushed and murdered on duty. At the time, Susan was only 17. Since that time, she is a powerful speaker on the issues of trauma and issues relating to PTSD and related issues. She is an author and has been very, very proactive in a number of areas. Susan, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us, other than what I already said during the interview, at 17, when you're really a young adult, just coming out of being a young person, and then being exposed to the murder of your dad, who was a police detective, and the circumstances surrounding it. In addition to all of that, when he was ambushed because he was going to be a witness in regards to a robbery of some sort or another, must have been devastating.
It was absolutely. Um, growing up with a father in law enforcement, when he was on the streets, I had that feeling that maybe something could happen to dad when I was younger. And as I got older and he became a detective, I had a false sense of security in that because I thought he has a desk job now and he comes in after the fact. So why would he be in any kind of danger?
Exactly. But when he was ambushed, he was off duty. He was in civilian clothes, as I understand
Mhm.
it. He was set
Mhm.
up for the
Yes.
purposes of being a witness on a robbery file, and he
Mhm.
was then killed as a result of that,
Yes.
which is virtually inconceivable from the average individual, and the same as there is always danger in being in law enforcement to a certain extent. But as you
Mhm.
indicated, although you had always anxiety to a certain extent about that, but when he got a desk job, and you kind of felt more comfortable. So
Yeah,
how did it, so it had an immense effect on your life and
it did.
on your future. Tell us about that. PTSD, I'm familiar with that because I was born in northeastern Holland in 1940. At the start of the Second World War, saw far too much that we should not have seen. You know, my dad was drafted into the Dutch army, and for 5 years they didn't know if he survived or lived, and all things related to that. So PTSD and trauma has been also to a certain extent part of my life, so I can relate to that, and still is today, even at nearly 85.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, um that night was, I had a normal teenage life, and that night I just wanted to go to a party. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to go to a party. My dad had already said no because it was a school night. And but I ran around the house and I cleaned the house that day because I was going to schmooze my parents to go to this party. And the plan was that dad was going to get off work at the courthouse after testifying. He was the lead detective in that case. Um, and go pick up my 6 year old brother from school. And then he would come home to my mom and I. And um, unfortunately, I didn't get that conversation because as I was getting ready for the night, we got a phone call and
And it
I
was
picked up the phone.
Halloween, right?
It
October
was Halloween.
31st,
Yep.
1985, so yeah.
Yep.
Okay, sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead. You got a
That's
phone
okay.
call.
I got a phone call. I thought it was for me being a teenager. So I ran and I picked it up. And it was a lady from my brother's school. And all she said was that there was a drive by shooting and my dad was involved. And my mom walked into the room. I handed her the phone as fast as I could. And I tried to listen in on the conversation, but I just had to watch my mom's body language to know that it was not
Ooh.
good. So she got off the phone, looked at me, and said, "We're going to the school." And I said, "Okay." So we got in the car and drove to the school. And it was a church school. So there was a parking lot in the middle of the school. And this was evening time. So it was after 5 o'clock where the kids got out on the back side of the school. We parked the car and started heading that way. And even though it was nighttime, it was dark, the whole sky was lit up with all of the police cars and the ambulance that was on that side of the street.
It was in San Fernando, right?
Yes, San Fernando
Close
Valley.
to LA, right? Yeah.
Yep. And so as we were walking, and like I said, it looked like it was daylight because there were so many lights on. We we glanced over and saw my dad's truck, so we started to run towards the truck. And the closer we got, we saw the glass on the ground, and as we rounded the corner, there he was, partially covered up.
Oh.
And my mom dropped and started to scream, and I stood, I froze in the street. I was not comprehending what I was looking at. And so what I ended up doing is hyper focusing on the ambulance. And my conversation in my head was, why aren't they helping him? Where is everyone? Why aren't they helping him? And soon enough, two officers came up, grabbed our arms, and escorted us back into the school, into an office. And I sat down on a chair, and my mom got taken away by some detectives. At that point, I didn't even know where my brother was. I didn't know if he was hurt. And as I sat there just trying to navigate all of the stuff that was around me and the chaos that was all around me, I could hear two ladies in the office talking, and they work there. And the one lady said that my dad was deceased. And that was when it hit me. That's where my world crashed. And I wanted to get up off that chair and run.
Now, your brother was only 6. Was he going
Yes,
to that school? And was your
yes,
dad picking him up, or how come your dad
yes,
was at the school?
yes. My dad was picking my brother up from school, and the after school care on the back side of the school. And he saw what was going to happen and turned to my brother and told him to duck down in the truck.
Oh, so
Um,
your brother was in his truck, and your dad
yes,
got shot in the truck,
on the outside of the truck.
on the
Yeah.
outside of the
He,
truck. Yeah.
yeah, he had put my brother in the passenger side of the truck and walked around the truck. And as he walked around the front of the truck, he saw what was happening, and he told my brother to duck down in the truck. So he saved my brother's life.
Oof. Ooh.
So I I heard this, and um I heard the women, and I wanted to run out of there as far as I could. And my mom came back into the room, and she said, "I'm sending you with a neighbor." And even though I wanted to run away, um, there was a kid part of me that needed to be with my family unit.
Right.
I needed to be with my mom and my brother,
Yeah.
and I didn't get that. I didn't get that chance. So I did go to a neighbor's house. And when I got into my neighborhood, I was absolutely floored because the entire neighborhood was filled with police officers, um, helicopters overhead. And by then, the media had ascended. So then you had the media there as well.
So did they get at that point the person that shot your dad? Did they know who it was at that point, or did they get him before he left the area, or what happened to that person?
No, actually, it took them 6 days to find them. And so I had my neighborhood, well, especially my house, was filled with police officers day and night. We had the helicopters day and night. Unbeknownst to us, we too were a target. Um, and so, they didn't tell us that, but we had so much police presence for 6 days. And I even had bodyguards that followed me anywhere. They were plainclothes police officers that would follow me anywhere I had to go. And so between being a normal teenage girl one day, and then the next day, this happened, and it just completely turned my life upside down
Forever.
forever.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
And, and
And
the hardest part of,
yeah,
go
go ahead.
ahead.
Go ahead.
The hardest part of that was that at the time, there were no resources for kids. In fact, mental health wasn't even spoken about
Right.
really. And, very little known about PTSD. In fact, back then it was called shell shock
Yeah.
because it was attributed to military coming back from war.
Right.
So I had no idea about mental health and the things that could occur when you are forced into trauma. And and so all the things that I was dealing with, which now I can look back and see that it was severe depression, and anxiety because my dad was my safe space. He was my security.
Yeah.
And now he's gone. And, so panic attacks, not sleeping. I didn't sleep at all. And my mom was dealing with all of the things that she needed to deal uh, with advocates and people within the department. And I was kind of pushed to the side a bit um, because of the assumption of I had my boyfriend, because I had a boyfriend back then, um, and is now my husband. But I had somebody and I had friends, and so therefore I was going to be fine,
Yeah.
which I was not. Hmm.
So if I look back, not like you, but being exposed to PTSD, trauma,
Hmm.
seeing things that we should not see at four or
Hmm.
5 years old, that always will stay with you. The other part with me was that because my dad was called into the Dutch army, that the last time they heard from him was before the bombing of Rotterdam. And so, where thousands of people died for 5 years, they would not know if he lived or died. He came back eventually. Things were never the same. But the other part was me and my brother, sister, that were 1 year and 2 years older than me at the time that the much later in life in counseling, uh, I still was struggling with the inner child. I didn't
Hmm.
fully understand that, what that meant until my now wife and myself were on counseling other issues, and the counselor more or less said to the two of us that I like to have a discussion with John on his own about the inner child.
Hmm.
I didn't even know what it was. I was already in my 50s, and
Yeah,
and so we agreed to do that. Very, very emotional, but but
absolutely.
very real.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they threw us into therapy probably about a month after my dad was killed. And at the time, I thought if you went to a therapist, you were crazy, because that was my child. That's what I thought. Um, but I was also in a mindset that if you just pushed me in a direction, that's the direction I would go. I didn't know how to advocate for myself, and I certainly didn't know how to verbalize the things that were going on inside of me for two reasons. One, I didn't know how to verbalize it. And two, I was terrified of verbalizing it and then somebody just throwing me in the loony bin. Um, you know,
Yeah,
I didn't know what to do. And um, so when I went to this therapist, I was really hopeful that maybe, this was going to be the person that was going to help me heal or make me feel better, right? So in a child's brain, I just wanted to feel better.
exactly.
And I was under the assumption that a doctor makes you feel better. And unfortunately, I didn't get that because I had a therapist that did not want to dip his toes in the weeds.
No.
He didn't ask me the questions, and he didn't make me feel like I could be vulnerable with him. So he kept our sessions very, very general, and it was all about my relationship with my mother, my brother, my boyfriend, and school. That's it. And every week I thought, oh, today's going to be the day. He's going to say something, do something to make me feel better. And it didn't happen for an entire year. And at that end of the year, he looked at me and said, I was a well rounded young lady and I was going to be fine for the rest of my life. And I didn't need to see him anymore.
Yeah.
So I walked out of there thinking, okay, I've cracked. I'm nuts. Like I'm crazy. And I'm going to have to figure this out on my own because a professional can't even help me.
So how old were you then? Were you still 18, 19, and that
I
was
was 18.
18? So it's still at a
Mm-hmm.
very delicate period in your life.
Mm-hmm.
The amazing part about it, Susan, is, and your history is devastating to say the least, but not different really in regards to you're now talking about the mid 80s,
Mm-hmm.
and even now we are 40 years further, that although in terms of speaking about trauma, PTSD and a child relations issues are looked at differently, but we still not there until as a male, from a male perspective, we don't particularly like going to counseling, although I've done it several times, and being probably not commonplace to do that. And then the other part, speaking about it, to me is important. And saying that it's still very much part of our lives that we have to try to be more open about, and it's more commonplace throughout the world, really, as a result of violence and the result of trauma, whatever that may be and whatever that may look
Right.
like, is
Right.
still very much part of our lives. And to find a acceptance of it, that it has nothing to do with being crazy or being weak, or any of the other things. Like, from a male perspective, be it too tough, we don't have to do that, we have no emotions, is very, very unfortunate. And I've seen it in my own life. When my dad did come back after 5 years, obviously his life is never the same again, because I've seen far too much that he should not have seen.
Mm-hmm.
Came close to death several times, became an alcoholic, for all intents and purposes.
Mm-hmm.
That alcohol became a part of his life, although I admire him greatly for all the things that he did, but still it
Mm-hmm.
affected everything around him and their relationships and himself,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of sharing emotions. I believe is a very, very important. If not, no matter if you're male, female, that it helps being able to talk about it, speak about it, write about it, for that matter, and saying that it opens up and it encourages, hopefully, others that
Yeah.
know that that's part of life, and to be able to communicate about it is helpful, not only to you, meaning you in a general sense, and myself, but it helps others to recognize it as there is nothing abnormal about you. It is simply ways that we have to deal with as part of life. Unfortunately, things will happen. Emotions
Mm-hmm.
and PTSD related issues will happen. And the more we
Mm-hmm.
can recognize it for what it is, the more helpful it will be. But it is still, even now, still a work in progress, in my opinion.
Sure is. It sure is. Yeah. I always say that I'm a work in progress.
Exactly.
Um, so yeah, I totally agree. I look at people as human beings, right? And we all have different experiences in life. Um, for me personally, with me being undiagnosed for so many years, after my dad's death, it kept me from really being able to recognize things that were not healthy for me as far as relationships, friendships, things like that. And I feel like, it really, if I had been able to heal in the very beginning, that it would have opened up a lot more for me. Um, but I didn't get to that until I was much older. And it had to slap me in the face in order for me to step forward and start healing again. And so I didn't really, I kind of I held things in. I had a feeling of I was a people pleaser. I molded myself into the person that people needed me to be. And that's how I coped with it. And that's, I didn't let anybody in. I didn't let them see all the turmoil and the mess that was inside of me. And for that, I think it just kept me from really living my life fully, with deep relationships around me, and um, some people, they deal with things in different ways. They cope with trauma in a different way, and some people drink and use drugs and whatever else that is self-sabotaging to themselves because that's their way of coping. My mom used alcohol as well, and I watched this process. And my mom was, and still is, a narcissistic personality who that increased the abuse that I received and that my brother received from her, in this process as well. And so, I don't, there is no blame, right, when it comes to coping mechanisms because we are human. And so everybody kind of chooses where they want to go. And you're right. A lot of this has to do with healing our inner children. And, there's a lot of programming around that as well. What we're told by our family members and when we're young, when we're very, very young and very impressionable. And it does carry through your adulthood as well, if you don't do the work. And for me, I didn't do the work for many, many years till I was in my 30s. So, and I had, I'll tell you that I got to a point in my life where I wanted to leave geographically. I wanted to leave Southern California, leave that part of my life behind. Joke was on me. Um, and not pretend that it didn't happen, but just make it go away for a while. And so I married the boyfriend I was with when my dad was killed, and we had 2 kids, and we moved to Colorado. And I was working as a hairdresser, and I worked at a salon that was very close to Littleton, Colorado. And we were here. I was working April 20th of 1999. I took a break and went and put on the back TV in our break room, and up popped the Columbine shootings live coverage. And I had a visceral reaction. I had flashbacks. I started to have a panic attack. Now, I remember I was told I was going to be fine for the rest of my life from my first therapist. So I didn't understand what was happening to me. Not at all. And because I pushed everything aside and I didn't let anybody know my story, my colleagues were confused too. They're like, why are you reacting like this? And I couldn't answer them. Um, and so when I was, what I ended up doing when I was living in fight, flight, or freeze is I created an emotional mask for myself based on what people told me I was. So, for instance, when someone said I was strong, I was brave, I was this, I was that, that's what I wore. I didn't let anybody see the turmoil inside. So, same thing. As soon as that happened and I started to feel myself spiral, I put that mask back on and I hid behind it and went back and finished my day thinking that this was going to go away, that I'm not attached to this situation over here and it was going to go away and I was going to be fine the next day. But the minute I walked out those doors and started to head home, all of the same emotions that I was feeling and felt when I was 17 came flooding back. And this time it was scarier because now I'm a mom. And I started to spiral and the depression kicked in. The anxiety kicked in. I stopped sleeping at night again. And then the suicidal ideation came flooding back. And I had this fight in my head about not wanting to feel this way, but then I'm a mom. I've got babies and I need to stay. And my husband, being the smart man that he is, he recognized me spiraling. And he met me at the door one day and said, Susan, you have two choices. You either go get help today or I'm putting you in a hospital. And at that point I was terrified. And I said, okay, I'm putting up my white flag. Like I give up. I'm going to do this. And I went and I made an appointment for a physician, and he put me on antidepressants because that's what they do. And then he handed me a business card and he said, I want you to make an appointment with this therapist. And I laughed at him because I was like, that I tried that. I went that route and it didn't work. So what makes you think it's going to work this time?
But
And
how long ago was that, Susan? Just for
this was 14 years later.
yeah, okay.
And so he says, you have no choice. You have to go. And I said, okay. And I made an appointment with this woman. And on her business card, it said she specialized in trauma. So I thought, okay. 3 minutes into our conversation, I knew that I was in a safe space. And she was finally asking me the questions that I had longed to hear many years ago that made me feel like I could be vulnerable with her. And so I had told her what I went through at 17 and what I was currently dealing with. And she looked me in the face and she said, Susan, everything you've gone through since you were 17 is normal because you have PTSD. Now, I was really confused because I was like, wait a minute, I'm not in the military. Like, I didn't go to war. What are you talking about? And she said, no. She said, anyone who has any kind of experiences any kind of trauma can also experience PTSD.
Exactly.
But what you need to understand is that PTSD doesn't just go away.
No.
You learn to manage it.
Exactly.
And in that moment, I had hope. I had hope. I had my person that I knew was going to be able to guide me and help me heal. And I had the sense that I could heal from this and that I could no longer be held over by all this pain that I had felt for so many years. And I was so, so grateful in that moment. So grateful. So that
So
was the
that was
start.
around close to 2000, really. You know,
Yeah, it was 1997 when all of this went, or 1999. Yeah.
right.
Yep.
So
Yep.
so so then you stayed with her
Mhm.
and counseling and helping
Yes.
you through
Yes.
understanding it and accepting it for what it is, or and as you then, I'm imagining this in my mind, is that as you then created comfort, your husband was an amazing support for you as well, because he knew you since you were 17,
Yeah.
and you know, and obviously, you know, then when at some point he stopped you at the door and said either or, not I'm leaving, but rather saying, you either start doing something about it in terms of counseling, or otherwise I take you to the hospital, was a
Yep.
critical moment for you.
It was.
And
Yep.
then so So then at some point you started to become more vocal about understanding PTSD and related issues. And
Mhm.
then I'm maybe going forward fairly quickly here, not for the purpose that's what I want to do, but simply to understand you,
Yeah.
because I'm trying to relate it to things that happened with me. You started speaking about it and feeling that you had an obligation to share this with others.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I had been speaking off and on my whole life, since it happened for various things,
Right,
media and all that. However, it was very surface level, when I spoke about it at the time because I was unhealed at the time. However, as I become when I became more healed and from my trauma, I was able to really go out and say, and tell my story. Um, and as I was doing that, I decided at that time that I wanted to write a book. And at 50, I don't know what it is about 50 years old, but at 50 years old, I put a line in the sand and I said, this thing has to get out.
right.
And part of it is that I wanted people to, so many people had my story in their heads and they had an idea of who I was, and it was not correct. So I really wanted to tell my story initially. And the other side of that is that there were so many people in the law enforcement world that had a lot of pain and anger wrapped around the story of my dad's murder.
Yeah.
And I felt like telling my story, showing them the resiliency side, showing them that I'm healing from it, would give them a way that they could heal as well.
And the people around them, right? So,
Yes.
and the book's name is The Other Side of the Gun. Have you got a copy of the book close to you so you can show it to us? So that's the book, The Other Side of the Gun. Very popular, available at all the media, Amazon, on and on and on, and bookstores and all over the place as well. So you did that, and now I'm also an author, and I've written 5 books, different ones. And the other thing that through all of this, Susan, one of the things that observations that I make about you is that obviously you're very honest, very outgoing, but you're a very good communicator. And so
Thank you.
communications skills are very, very important for you even to share with you and the rest of the world about the trauma and the life that you lived, and then to write the book about it. So and but communication skills to me is very, very important. The last book that I wrote, and it's coming out in July actually, is the a billion dollar about communication skills that is critical
Hmm.
to a lot of people that have been successful, but not only the ones that have been successful, but also to tell the story or share with others their experiences, like what you did in your book of The Other Side of the Gun. The it's not easy to write books.
No.
And so
I
the
had
first one
no.
that I did is that, so I'm nearly 85, and so and I have similarities, obviously, which we already talked about, being affected
Hmm.
by seeing too much that I should not have seen, and family, and all of those things.
Hmm.
Is PTSD has been part of my life, and obviously got in late life in my 50s, got counseling for the inner child, which was
Mhm.
immensely emotional, but very helpful. But a lot of time, and then academically, I was not a success story. In Holland, I failed grade 3, I failed grade 7 3 times, and then people said to my parents, or my parents said, what are we going to do now with this guy? They said, send him to the mentally challenged school. They said, no, we're not going to do that. So they, my grandfather was a master carpenter. My dad worked in lumber. So at 12 and a half years old, they sent me to a furniture factory to become a furniture maker. And so that's what I did. But the dream that I always had is that we were liberated by the Canadian Army in April the 12th, 1945 in northeastern Holland. And it made such an impression on me that I knew from that point forward, as I grew up, I would go to the land of my heroes, Canada. And I was going to go when I was 17, and my parents wouldn't let me then. Then I was drafted into the Dutch Air Force, but was there for 2 years. And then I went to Canada when I was 23, and I came to the West Coast, and I wanted to start with nothing. And so I had a suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, very little money, and I wanted to prove to me that I was just as smart as all the other kids. Not smarter than, but just as smart. And in
Mhm.
order to do that, I struggled with who am I? Was always a
Yeah.
question for me because of all the things. And in order for me, and you see some of the connections
Mhm.
psychologically, is that in order for me to prove to me who I was, because in Holland, the way things are when you get married, or you apply for a business, or you apply for a job, or no matter what you do, they always ask saying, where are your diplomas? Well, I didn't have any diplomas. So I had
Mhm.
to start with nothing. So, and I felt that starting with nothing, going to Canada, then, landed in Montreal, took the train across Canada, 4 days, 5 nights. My God, that's a long way. So anyway, so when I came to Vancouver, I went to the immigration office, and I could speak English. And fortunately, there was a German fellow. I could speak some German. I told him I want to build a lumber mill. And he said, go to Prince George. That's here, and I can still see where the Greyhound station is, or used to be from here. And so I had, there I had my suitcase. I had 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and I counted my money at least 3 times. I had exactly $25.47. But I had attitude. I've always been positive, even when people in school already said, well, he will never amount to much because he doesn't know how to learn, he's too dumb, and he probably becomes a laborer. And a lot of people looked at labor that I was then, although my friends went to college and university. I'm still proud of that today, and it served me well. But I always had positive attitude. The other one is passion. Whatever I do, I give it 125%. And work ethic. I work harder than anybody. And even now, at nearly 85, I usually get up at 5:30 in the morning. I always make my bed, and I always think I'm late. And so, yes, I did build my mill and a lot of other companies. But it took me a long time for me to find who am I. And in order for me to reconcile that in my mind,
Mhm.
I had to leave Holland, come here, although I wanted to do that, start over new again, go to the land of my heroes, and prove to me that I could build a lumber mill, and I was just as smart as anybody else. And then, even then still, it took me time to figure out who am I. And then already in my 70s, I knew, and I was told so many times, why don't you write a book about it, John? It's you had such an interesting life, and well, as I said, writing books is not easy. So for 20 years, I went started, stop, and then I knew if I didn't do it now, it would never happen. So I wrote this book, Against All Odds, not about how successful John is, but about 80 years of the going through all the ups and downs. It took me 80 years to
Mhm.
live it, 20 years to think about it, 2 years to write it. And then from there and then, I wrote other books as well that it was in Canada that even after 32 years, I was not a very good communicator. And until I went to a bookstore here, and already after 32 years being here in 1997, I picked up a book, and the book's title was Driven to Distraction. And this is the
Mhm.
actual book that I picked up. And I don't know why I picked it up. It's about ADHD. And
Mhm.
I wrote in the book in Dutch because it was implied that it's a mental deficiency. That now in Dutch I wrote, now I finally know who I am, and it was January 1997, and so that kind of changed my life in a way,
Absolutely. Mhm.
and then I gained more confidence, and then the other part that changed my life in terms of communications, by coincidence, in the late 90s or in the early 90s, I was invited to go to an organization they call Toastmasters, and
Yep.
say, why don't you go down there? And I said, are they going to ask me any questions? They said, no, you just sit there and listen to it. So I did, and in the middle of the meeting somebody said, hey John, tell us all about you. I said, oh my God, I'll never go back here. But I did. I stayed there for 10 years, became a distinguished Toastmaster, which changed my life. And so that combination of all the above, I felt I had to do the same, tell all the challenges along the way, from
Mhm.
PTSD, seeing too much, the inner child, struggling with schooling, ADHD issues, which was
Mhm.
called mental disorder of some sort. I came to the conclusion that ADHD is a superpower. And,
It
and,
is.
and so I started
I
writing
was just
books,
thinking that.
and I wrote a book about that as well, ADHD Unlocked. Then
Nice.
I wrote it. Then so uh, and so now I'm working on my fifth one and sixth one, and sharing with the world, if you wish, and I hope that it will encourage people. And the unbelievable part is that podcasting is so powerful that this is the new media globally. It's still on its infancy, and
Mhm.
there you and me are sitting here interacting about our past and trauma, and issues relating to confidence, and issues that are being looked at in a lot of ways as liabilities, and where we are question ourselves. It was not until I went through all of this already in my 70s. Can you believe that at 12 and a half years old, I left school, and was basically concluded that John just is not smart enough for this, and he will become a laborer of some sort. And so that took me till 1997, nearly 57 years later. It took me 5 years before I would go to our family doctor that had delivered our two daughters, but also was a personal friend. And he said, hey, John, why are you here? I said, I think I got ADHD. And we checked it out, and I do. So after 50 years, from
Mhm.
the time that I was 12 and a half going to get a labor job till the time I was 62, it was only then that I discovered ADHD. And even more importantly, that's not a liability. It can well be a real benefit.
Mhm.
And I wrote about it, I speak about it from time to time. In a lot of cases, I incorporate it, and if it is appropriate, incorporate it in some of the discussions that I have on podcasting as well. So that's
Yeah.
kind of part of my journey.
Mhm. Yeah, it's incredible. it is. You said something earlier, about finding the purpose. And so writing the book, it took me 4.5 years to write my book because I had to relive and refeel all of the emotions and the things that I've been through, in order to put it in words. And through that, I did find my purpose. I did realize that this message that I have is important for people to hear, for more reasons than I even was understanding. Because for so many years I struggled so much, and then when I finally got, kind of like you, being able to realize that you had ADHD, same thing. I finally understood that I had PTSD and all the things that come with that. And I finally understood, this is why I act the way I do. This is why I have these reactions. This is, and it gave me the answers that I had been searching for so many years. And so I wanted to kind of give that to other people. I wanted them to actually see my journey and see the things that I've been through and how I found forgiveness and how I was able to take my power back. And it no longer has a hold on me. The pain of losing my dad, the trauma of seeing his body, and just all the things that happened after that, no longer has a hold over me. And so it's really important for me to go out and speak to people and give them what I did not have, which was the hope. And when I did get it, it was like such a blessing. And also to let people know that, like, their healing is their healing. It's not your doctor's healing, it's yours. And so you have every right to interview your therapist. Make sure that they understand your type of trauma, right? Because sometimes doctors want to lump us all into one group, and you can't. Everybody is different, right? And so when you do that and you allow yourself to be vulnerable because you have that safe space with that person, that is when the true healing starts to happen. The work is not easy. I don't candy coat that at all. It's not easy. It's probably the hardest thing that you'll ever do. But not having that pain and that trauma a hold over you anymore is priceless.
So the part that I hear that were critical in your life were obviously what happened for obvious reasons. But then
Mhm.
the next thing, that is in 1985, that the counseling initially was not helpful. In fact, it was more of a liability that made
Mhm.
even more of a question. The family unit that was remaining is your mom, not over playing that part, but was not helpful either, and was
Mhm.
difficult on you and your brother, your
Mhm.
younger brother, 10 years younger than you, or 11 years younger than you. And then it was not until your now husband, and that had been with you for, since you were 17, kind of said, stop you at the door and say either or, where you said, okay, I'm ready. And so then, by coincidence, meeting the right person that connected you to the lady that focused on trauma, that you, as
Mhm.
you said, in the first 3 minutes, you knew this was the person.
Yep,
And
I did.
so that was the turning point, likely. And then the other part amazing with you, though, is that what impressed me, you're a very good communicator. And so communication skills are so critically important, and have been in my life, and have not been until I went to Toastmaster, that gave me confidence, and
Mhm.
then and helped me reconciling who am I, until I was at peace with who I am, and that was in my 70s. where I can then start writing and speaking and giving presentations. I'm very good at that,
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
because I am at peace with who I am and
Yeah.
I'm honest about it, and I believe that the combination of all of it is not so much, I'm successful in businesses and all that other, but that's not important to me. But to share with others the experience and the vehicle is podcasting in particular, and the books as well. But podcasting is so immensely powerful because
Mm-hmm.
the issues that you and me are talking about here in this podcast are global issues,
Yeah, for sure.
and they are not still not to recognize to the extent that they could be and should be, because they are common. And hopefully, I hope and I believe you do, is that we already know that through this media, podcasting in particular, that some people will benefit from this and then
Mm-hmm.
have access to your books or my books and listen to these podcasts. That will be helpful. But I usually say when I give presentations to young persons, in particular, may it be high school, college, or university for that matter, is that I usually indicate that I think too many people are too preoccupied as to what do other people think they are, what do they look like, why is this not different, I should do
Mm-hmm.
this differently, and I say that there is only one of you on this earth,
Mm-hmm.
only one.
Yep.
Accept it as special, and
Yeah.
so all the other things are secondary, and come to at peace with who you are, and hopefully gain confidence. And so that was one of my biggest struggles through lives, and with you and the trauma, accepted too, and then in regards to my foundation, PTSD, and all the other things that I went through, to me have become helpful now as the foundation that allows me now in my 80s to still be very proactive. I'm still active in businesses. I do speaking, presenting, write books, obviously be very active in podcast. And a lot of people say to me, how do you do all this stuff that you're doing? I say, ADHD, that's how I do it. So, but
That's the
again,
positive.
being open about it and sharing it with the people through podcasting, I believe is very, very important.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, people have asked me, like, why don't you have a podcast? Well, for one, I know what it looks like to do behind the scenes, and I'm not a techie person, and so I can't, I will guest on podcasts all day long, but for me to do all the, no, I can't, I don't have it in me. Writing books, yes. This was my first one, and I'm sure there's more in here somewhere. My editor did tell me that I'm living my next book. But for me, it's stages, like getting out there and being able to connect with my audience. That is what drives me. If I can make a difference in one person's life, whether I am on a podcast or I am on a stage or I'm doing a virtual event, if I can make a difference in one life, I've done my job. And so that's my purpose, is to be out there. I consider myself a light worker in this world, and that I help people and bridge. Um, I am a bridge from the trauma to the healing, and that's why I became a trauma resiliency coach. Is for that purpose.
I like it, Susan, and sewing. I'm not suggesting everybody should be going podcasting, but for being a guest for podcasters like me, I'm fortunate to have people like yourself that are sharing their stories
Mhm.
with the rest of the world through me as a podcaster. For me is very, very important. So I podcast frequently because it is my vehicle in a way, together with my books, but I also guest on others. And the whole single purpose for me is the same as yours. If we
Yes,
can find people that would like to be have more information on me, then I do that through podcasting. And
that's awesome.
I hope that the people watching this podcast and watching myself and Susan Snow, read her books. She will show it to us. Show it to us once more, Susan. And it's available on all the normal Amazon and many other ones, and very
Yeah.
important book. And so I will also send you copies of my book, and I will sign them for you, and then share them with you. And the objective
Thank
that
you.
I have is hoping that even if one person or more persons, we know that this podcast, I'm not bragging about it, but that's how powerful it is, that we have close to 1 million subscribers on YouTube. That means on the other platforms, maybe up to 2.5 million people could potentially be watching this podcast and around the world. And that to me is the objective, not anything else, not bragging about it,
Mm.
but to share it with others, and it hopefully will be helpful.
Well, it's amazing work that you do because getting our stories out there and getting our messages out there are imperative, especially now. A lot of people are dealing with a lot of things coming up for them um, within trauma, and so I think it's even more important for us to get out there and really push out the message of hope.
Thanks again, Susan, for this podcast, and we'll stay in touch. And I'll make sure
Sounds
I
good.
send you copies of my book. Scott will have your address, and I'll sign them for you and send them to you. I hope you send me a copy of your book as well and sign it for me.
Absolutely. I sure
Excellent.
will.
Thanks, Susan. Take
All
care.
right. Thank you so much.
Bye bye.
Bye.